Welcome everyone to Bodhipath Chicago, and welcome to all of our friends joining us online. My name is Matthew Brown. I'm one of the coordinators here at Bodhipath Chicago, and we are really excited. I think we have something like 50 registrants for this event, as well as a lot of those registrants are actually just centers, and so there's another group of people at those centers as well. So we're probably I don't know. There could be as many as 100 people joining us here today. We'll see. We have a great turnout here in Chicago. I will turn the camera around so you guys who are joining us online can see what it looks like here. But I will just give a brief introduction and say something really quickly about the event, and then I'll introduce Trinlay Rinpoche, who's here, and we'll get started. So this event is part of a new effort by Bodhipath Centers to make the teachings that we offer in our centers more widely available. Not everyone lives near a center, or if you are part of a center, maybe there are teachers going to another center and you want to hear what those teachings are. And we have these amazing teachers and these fantastic teachings, and what we're trying to do is broaden the reach and availability. So this particular event is going to be, involves 5 sessions. Tonight, tomorrow, starting at 1:30. There's a 2-hour session from 1:30 to 3:30, and then a half-hour break, and then 4 to 6. And then Sunday from 10:30 to 4, so 10:30 to 12:30, with an hour and a half break for lunch, and then again from 2 to 4. There are some people who are joining us live here in Chicago. There's some people who are joining us live online. And there are some people who are not able to join every session live and will be watching this recorded. And for those of you who are here live, you also will have the opportunity to gain access to the recordings if you want to go back and listen and study. So in general, the recordings are available for people who have participated in the course. These aren't just going to be, up there, in YouTube land. We may use YouTube, but it'll be a private link. And anyway, so that's the event. We're very excited that you can help be part of this experiment. For everyone who's online, we ask that you keep your video off and remain muted. The video off because it creates a better quality stream, and the muted so that not everyone is hearing the background noise wherever you are. If you have questions, there's a chat in Zoom, and we'll be monitoring the chat the whole time. If you have a question, you can ask it there, and we'll ask it on your behalf at the best opportunity. For those of you who are here live in the room, you can raise your hand and Rinpoche will call on you at what he feels are the appropriate times. For all of our events, we appreciate any, everything is offered freely. The Dharma is free, and it's available to everybody no matter what. For those of you who can, make an offering to support this program and to also think about it as making it possible for the next person to come through the door freely as well. That's greatly appreciated. In addition to the program offerings, you're also welcome, if you wish, to make offerings to the teacher directly. For those of you online, we've provided links where you can do that. For those of you here, there's offering boxes in the front of the room. And then now onto this event. So we're very excited to have this program called the Foundations of Buddhism. This was a special program designed by Rinpoche to sort of lay kind of like the basic groundwork of what every person who's a practicing Buddhist really should know and be able to do. I'll let Rinpoche say more about that, but let me quickly just introduce Rinpoche, Karma Trinlay Rinpoche, who is with us in Chicago. He's been here before. This is, I think, the second time visiting Chicago. He was actually one of the very first Westerners to be recognized as a reincarnation of a tulku, which is a Buddhist saint or a great master yogi at a very, very young age. And he was trained at a very early age in a traditional Tibetan monastery. He's fluent in Tibetan and also French and English and Sanskrit, although that's not a spoken language these days, and maybe more. I'll let him say that if he wants to. And was actually received his monastic training with Kalu Rinpoche, who's one of the great masters of the 20th century. And Rinpoche teaches at Bodhipath centers around the world. He is been received both traditional Buddhist education, as I mentioned, from a very young age, but also received his own degree in was it philology or
yes, history.
Yeah, and from the Sorbonne in France. And so he's sort of multicultural, multilingual, and a really wonderful teacher who's very, I'll let that demonstrate for himself, but a very clear and engaging style. So we are very excited to have this really precious opportunity to hear from Rinpoche here. And I will now hand over to Rinpoche. Thank you so much for being here.
Thank you. Thank you, Matt.
Don't worry, everyone. I'm not going to keep the cameras on you, but just so that everyone who's joining us knows the context.
So good evening, everyone. It's a pleasure to be back here in Chicago after quite a few years. I think last I was here was back in 2013, I believe, if I'm correct, while I was doing a series of talks on the work of the Master Shantideva, entitled the Bodhisattvacharya Avatara, which was recorded. I believe many of you have seen some of the recordings, or maybe some of you were even there for some of the talks that I gave. So it was a series of about, I don't remember the exact number, but maybe 80 or so 2-hour sessions covering the whole book. So that, so one of the, at one point we were here in Chicago, and I believe we talked about the topic related to refuge here in Chicago, if my memory is correct. So as Matt kindly explained to us, this weekend, this evening and this weekend, the idea is to look at somehow the foundations of Buddhist teaching and practice. As you know, in our Buddhipath centers, we have kind of a guideline that was given to us by the founder of our centers, the late Kunzik Shamal Rinpoche, who passed away in 2014. And late Rinpoche asked me to try to work on kind of structuring the curriculum guideline of practice and teachings. And so here, the idea is to take some of the topics that are in those guidelines and to try to put them in a structure. So here really the idea is to give you some of the foundational teachings that can help you understand, first of all, what is actually Buddhism, okay? And what does it really mean to be a Buddhist or to follow the Buddhist path? How to understand that? There's many ways of looking at that. This is what we will try to cover tonight. And tomorrow we'll look at understanding from Buddhist perspective our place here. Why are we here? In other words, you have many different theories from different religions and so on that explain why is it that we're here, and what can we do about it, and what's the Buddhist take on that, so to speak. So here, in relation to this, we will talk about the mind, of course, and Buddhist teaching of the Buddha, known as the 12 parts of interdependent origination. And of course, in that topic, we will also cover the notion of karma, of causality of our actions, our thoughts, our actions, and our becoming. And in the afternoon, we will introduce you to the practice of meditation, more specifically shamatha meditation, which is a very important part of Buddhist practice. And we could have done that later on, but I wanted to do it earlier to give you also a chance to practice a little bit and to be able to discuss more about this topic the following day on Sunday, and to be able to share more on this topic of meditation practice. And then on Sunday, always in relation somehow with meditation practice and looking at the mind, we'll go a little more in depth in the mind and try to understand how our mind actually functions. So here we'll draw on teachings from the Buddhist Abhidharmas and speak about the Buddhist theory of attention, so to speak. And, you know, you might have heard of mindfulness and all these different topics. So trying to clarify some of these points, give you keys to understanding your mind and how it functions. This will give you at the same time kind of more precision on what we talked about when we spoke about the 12 parts of interdependent origination, and when we talked about meditation. This is kind of a topic that will help that. And then following that, the last teaching on Sunday will be more focused on, you know, practice. What are the stages of the practice? How do you really you know, make progress along the path? What is it that you should aim towards? And so there are things related to that. You know, how what does it mean to make progress? So that's kind of somehow the overview. Now, before we start this evening's topic, I would like to invite all of you to cultivate or to try to develop, I would say in other words, an altruistic motivation. That's a very important part of Buddhist practice. Buddhist practice is not that much about just doing external things. It's mainly about working with your mind. And one important part of our mind, or let's say one important part of the activity of our mind, is its intentions. And generally, our intentions are somewhat self-centered, you know, egotistical. Where when we want to do something, whatever we do, whatever we want, it's always for ourselves. And this, as we will see later on, as we will talk, is very much related to the problems we have in life and the difficulties we encounter in life, the inner you could say that the mind in its default mode of functioning is self-centered. And in this mode is characterized always by a certain degree of stress and unsatisfaction. So if you want to overcome that, you have to try to look at parts of your mind that are free from that, or will not produce that type of consequence of stress and unsatisfaction. And the point is that your mind is not by essence self-centered. Self-centered is it's behavior of your mind that it developed through its own confusion. And this confusion is expressed mainly in the self-centeredness. So if you want to overcome that, you have to work on on many different things. And one of the things is your motivation. And you can try to have an attitude that is less self-centered. And that will lead to more favorable consequences for yourself. So, for example, what we say often, this is a traditional kind of advice that is given to people who want to study and learn the Buddhist teachings. There's an image that is given, the image of a recipient, like a bowl. So you could imagine that the teachings of the Buddha, somehow the inheritance the Buddha left us all, is like a water, and you would like to get some of it. But to get some of it, you can't just pull out your hand, nothing will come, nothing will stay. You have to have a good recipient, right? So if you bring out a recipient, but you present it the wrong way up, no matter how much water is poured in, not a single drop will stay in, right? So that's the image of somebody who is physically present, but mentally absent. That means he's here, sitting in the hall, listening to the teachings, but actually he's daydreaming, thinking about yesterday or tomorrow, or he's just not paying attention to what is being said or trying to understand what is being said. So for that, it's important to put the bowl right side up so you can really get the teachings. Okay. But then there's another defect that can happen if the bowl has a crack, though it's not upside down, it's the right side up. Water does get into it, but then it doesn't stay. Eventually, because of that crack, the water will seep out of the recipient, and then one day it will be empty. And that is kind of an image of you are, yes, physically present, mentally present. You're understanding what is being taught, but then you don't really appropriate the teachings, meaning you don't reflect on the teachings. Now, once you have heard something, learned something, it's important to really make sense of what you've heard and come back to that teaching and reflect on it. If you reflect on it and you, so to speak, by your own verify if it is valid or not, then you can really appropriate the teachings, in the sense you will know these teachings to be true through your own reflection and understanding, not just because you just heard it. Okay? And then the last defect is that if the bowl has not been cleaned, so you might reflect on the teachings and understand it properly, be able to use it all, but if the bowl is dirty, then if you try to drink out of the water, you might get sick, right? So you have to make sure your bowl is clean. This is the image of the motivation. For example, if you come to the teachings and you have you come with the basis of this self-centered attitude, and you are looking at the teachings as a means to serve the ego. You want to either through these teachings become somebody who is more powerful, more intelligent than others, or you want to use these teachings through greed. Also, this is ego-centered, so you can make a profit out of it, or you can through that compete with others and be better than others. If you have that kind of self-centered attitude, then the problem is your motivation will stain kind of your whole effort, in the sense that because you came with that intention and you're very strongly motivated by that, whatever you do with these teachings, you will use it to serve that aim. And that aim is an aim that at the end will not be beneficial to you, because it's not the true aim of the teachings. So to try to not fall into that, we recommend that at the beginning of actually any kind of wholesome deed, such as, of course, learning the Dharma, to introspect and think, why am I here? Why do I want to learn the Dharma? And think about that. And maybe we are not very strongly altruistic, but we can start by just thinking, I want to I want to use these teachings so that I can be better, be a better person, be a greater influence for others in a beneficial way. So if you could have at least that kind of motivation, that I will use these teachings to benefit myself and others. Myself in the sense of becoming a better person, becoming kinder, more compassionate, more wise, not just becoming richer, more powerful, not serving the ego, in other words. Okay? So that, to think about that. Of course, if you can think about, for example, maybe family members, friends, people that are dear to you. How can you be a better person for them? Okay, start with that. How can you have in wherever you are in the world, a more positive impact? If we think about life every day, particularly in this modern age, we are consumers. And this all has kind of a footprint on nature, on animals, on many beings that, because of our consumption, suffer, right? And all of this is benefiting us, but we are not really in return benefiting the world or others that much. So we can think, okay, I've been alive here in this world for so long. What am I leaving behind me? What positive imprint can I leave in this world towards others? And what is it that is truly positive that I can do for myself that is beneficial ultimately, not just serving the ego for immediate gain, but ultimately. So think about those topics. And of course here, the recommended motivation is altruistic one, the greatest altruistic one that is possible, which is really considering that I want to learn the Dharma so to benefit not just myself, but particularly all beings without exception. Okay? So in order to kind of put words to that, we do the practice of cultivating the 4 immeasurables. And this is preceded by our intention to follow the Buddhist path, to have as a main aim the attainment of awakening, and to aim for that also in an altruistic way. So that's here the recitation of refuge that we repeat 3 times, then followed by the 4 immeasurables, which are immeasurable affection or love for sentient beings, and compassion, and then joy and equanimity. So if you please join me, we'll recite this together and reflect on our motivation. Until I have reached full awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, the Supreme Assembly, By means of beneficial actions such as generosity, may I attain enlightenment in order to benefit beings. Until I have reached full awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By means of beneficial actions such as generosity, may I attain enlightenment in order to benefit beings. Until I have reached full awakening, I take refuge in the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By means of beneficial actions such as generosity, may I attain enlightenment in order to benefit beings. May all beings find happiness in the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering in the cause of suffering. May they not be separated from the perfect happiness that is free from suffering. May they abide in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings find happiness in the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering in the cause of suffering. May they not be separated from the perfect happiness that is free from suffering. May they abide in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. May all beings find the happiness in the cause of happiness. May they be free from suffering in the cause of suffering. May they not be separated from the perfect happiness that is free from suffering. May they abide in great equanimity, free from attachment and aversion to those near and far. Thank you. So we're going to look this evening at what is Buddhism, and particularly what does it mean to be a Buddhist, and through that try to see if really how Buddhism is actually very relevant in our 21st century. Although it is a very ancient, has very ancient sources, you could say, it is still a very relevant teaching and practice for this time. So there are a number of points that characterize the Buddhist path. I believe one of them, a very important one, is that the Buddhist teachings are characterized in terms of its practice as a path of non-violence, of not harming other beings. So this is a very important part of Buddhist practice. Whether we are a beginner Buddhist or more advanced, for example, following the Mahayana teachings of Buddhism, whatever the path, all of the Buddhist practice, all of Buddhist ethics in one word can be summarized in the fact of not harming others. On that basis, can we envisage then to benefit others? Of course, what we would like to do is to be able to benefit others, but we cannot really do that if we can't first start harming them. So Buddhist ethics, Buddhist discipline, for example, you find Buddhist teachings a number of different commitments one can make, for example, through refuge, through the Pratimoksha vows, the Bodhisattva vows, and so forth. All of these are commitments. If you look at them carefully, they're all designed so that we can lead a life in which we have the least negative impact on others, that we don't harm others. Now that is, of course, not unique to Buddhism. For example, if you look at many other religions, non-violence to a certain degree is taught. Whether it is in monotheistic religions that we have here in the West, or other forms of religions, respecting other human beings, not killing them, not harming them, is taught in each and every religion. There's not a single religion where it is said that to hurt others is a good thing. So, of course, there's different views on this. For example, certain religions, they don't consider that killing animals is harming another because they don't give that kind of statue of a sentient being to animals. They only consider not harming other humans, for example. So in this sense, Buddhist teachings, I think, go much further. What is expressed maybe somehow imperfectly in other religions, like not to harm, is expressed much more clearly in the Buddhist teachings. So in Buddhism, it's not about just not harming other human beings, it's also not harming any other type of sentient being, that is all animals, all types of living forms. So this is a very fundamental part of Buddhist practice. And there are other religions, for example, also that respect other life forms, other sentient beings. One of the traditions that come to mind is Jainism, for example, which respect greatly other animals. However, if you look carefully, some of these traditions, although they teach not to harm other sentient beings, nonetheless, the practitioners will undertake hardship, different forms of hardship, such as inflicting pain on themselves as a mean of salvation, through starving themselves or mortifying themselves in different forms, in different ways, And that also is a form actually of violence towards yourself. So in this sense, Buddhism is known as the path that is truly free of all violence. For this path not only does not entail avoiding to harm others, it also entails not harming yourself. In this way, all the teachings on the Buddhist way of life, Buddhist ethics, is about how to lead a life through which you don't harm yourself, nor do you harm others. And this is somehow exemplified in what the Buddha taught as the middle way, avoiding two extremes. One extreme, which is the extreme of living life just for your pleasure, immediate pleasure. The other extreme is a life where you engage in so-called spiritual practices that actually harm you, such as different form of mortification, so forth. So it doesn't fall into those two extremes. So it's a life or way of life. It's known as the middle way, where you take care of your body, you take care of yourself, and your ethics entails not harming others or yourself. This middle way also entails learning how to be satisfied with simple things. So it's also a path of simplicity in many ways. Now, we like to have a lot, have many things. We have to have the best always, and so on and so forth. So this somehow can occupy our life very much. So here it's to learn also simplicity, in the sense of learning to be satisfied with what is just fulfilling what is necessary, what we really need, and try to limit maybe on what we want. We want to have a lot, but maybe many of the things we want is just distracting us in creating suffering for us, more problems for us. So here it's also in this sense, this middle way path of simplicity. So this is one of the important aspects of Buddhism. Another important point is meditative practice, practice of meditation. So Buddhist practice is not, of course, just limited to following this middle path, this way of life that doesn't harm ourselves or others, but it's also a path that teaches us to turn our intention inwardly, to look into our mind and to work with our mind. So this, of course, is something very much put forward in Buddhist teachings. For example, if you look at the image of the Buddha, he is always represented seated in the posture of meditation. So this is one of the kind of core practices of Buddhism. There are many different forms of meditation, different methods of meditation. It's an essential part of this practice. Yet still, it's not unique to Buddhism. You have many other traditions that teach meditation. You have a number of different, these days, I mean, you can go almost to any massage parlor and they'll teach you meditation. There's meditation written everywhere. There are Catholic monks that practice meditation and teach meditation. You have many places where you practice yoga, where they teach also meditation, many different forms of meditation. However, there's a unique form of meditation that is taught in Buddhism that we will talk about later, which is a form of meditation that leads us to transcend conditioned existence. So that is the kind of specificity. Otherwise, meditation is not unique to Buddhism, but that specific way of practicing meditation is unique to Buddhism. Then there's another important point, which is a view, philosophical view. There are to have a view, a point of view is not, of course, unique to Buddhism. Everyone has points of views. Every religion and philosophical traditions, what have you, have points of views. So one of the views that has been assigned to Buddhism as unique is the view on the absence of the existence of self. So in other words, all Buddhist schools generally hold that there is no such thing as the self. Yet, however, that is kind of simplifying very much the Buddhist view, for there are certain Buddhist schools who talk about self, but in a different context than what we would understand self generally. They use the term self, of course. And there have been also other non-Buddhists who have spoken about the absurdity of the idea of self. For example, in philosophy, and even in Western philosophy. So it's not something in that sense unique. So from the Buddhist perspective, it is about understanding true nature of reality, the true nature of your mind, and in this way transcending our representations of reality and dualistic clinging. So this is related to the understanding of the absence of termed absence of self or emptiness, and that associated with the contemplative tradition is something that is very unique to Buddhism, but that view is also associated with a number of other points, such as what is known as the Four Seals that characterize the Buddhist teachings. And we'll talk about that later. So these three points that I just brought up are known as the Buddhist, so to speak, how to say, practice, meditation in view. Shila, Samadhi, Prajna in Sanskrit. That means, your contact or discipline, and contemplative practice, and view. So, there are some other points. I'll go into more detail on this later, but there are a few other points that we might associate with Buddhism that are, for example, the fact that Buddhism is a non-theistic tradition. This means that, you could wonder, is Buddhism a religion or not, actually? Some people have asked that question. Some people say Buddhism is actually more of a philosophy than a religion. And it has been argued that Buddhism is not a religion because Buddhism doesn't believe in God. Okay? In this sense, it's a non-theistic tradition. However, there are a few points to clarify here, I believe. First of all, Buddhism doesn't has a position that is probably different from atheist position, which is to say there is no God. That would be an atheist position. From a Buddhist perspective, God could exist, since it is claimed by many that God exists, that they had visions of God, and they spoke to God, and they were blessed by God, and so forth. It's possible that God exists. It's not that's not what is, so to speak, an issue for the Buddhist. What Buddhists don't recognize is that there is such a being who is the creator of the world. They don't accept that God has the power of creating the world, that everything depends on him. And therefore, they don't consider that God has the ability to give you freedom from conditioned existence, or can establish you in the state of Buddha. So venerating a God cannot bring you true liberation or true freedom. So there are a number of reasons for that in the Buddhist view. First of all, is that if you consider the notion of a God as an eternal being, which is what is claimed generally by the theistic traditions, then it is contradictory to claim that he is the creator. For something to be eternal excludes its ability to create. For creation implies a process with a beginning, a middle, and an end. And if something is implicated in that process, he has to change. If he changes, he cannot be eternal. For something that is eternal knows no change. It is always the same. So there is actually a fundamental contradiction, if you really look at it carefully, in the claim to say that an eternal being created the world. Either he is eternal, and then he has nothing to do with this world or what is becoming of us and what is our future, because he is eternal, he cannot create, or else he is the creator, and in that case he is not eternal. And if he is the creator and if he is not eternal, he is not the first cause. That means he is a being himself to be able to change and move that depends on other causes and conditions. And if he is a being that has, in this sense, of volition, that means he has a dualistic state of mind, that his mind is therefore confused fundamentally, that he has the ego, and therefore he is still caught into what is known from the Buddhist perspective as a conditioned existence. And therefore he doesn't know awakening, and he cannot even teach you how to be awakened. And this is somehow underlined, for example, in the popular Buddhist presentation of the Buddha's life, where the great gods of India, Brahma and Indra, beseech the Buddha to teach, because they don't know what the Buddha knows, and they are unable to show that, for they themselves are confused beings. So they beg the Buddha to teach to humans who venerate them. So they, so to speak, are in the name of humanity, these gods come out and beseech the Buddha to teach. So, so Buddhism in this sense is non-theistic. Yet this fact of being a non-theistic tradition is not unique also to Buddhism. You have many other traditions that are also non-theistic, but this is, so to speak, just to understand more properly which way Buddhism is non-theistic. You have, for example, even in India, other traditions like the philosophical tradition of the Charvakas, or the Samkhyas, even the Jains. They all are non-theistic. Yes?
I'm just curious, how do the theists rationalize that their God is eternal?
Well, that's their view, yes. Oh, yes. Theist, the question is, theist rationalize that their God is eternal, right?
But how?
How do they rationalize
If
it?
he created, there's...
Well,
have you discussed this with any? I mean...
Well, their view is that he is, to my understanding, he is the first cause, the original, very first cause, and he has no cause. In this sense, he is eternal, and he will not change or die and so forth. However, probably they don't take the meaning of existence to the same extent, to the full extent of its meaning. Following very much, I think, our general view, like, for example, we can think of, if you look at our general way of relating to things, we might think, oh, I exist. I know that one day I will die, but between last year and this year, I think I'm the same, yet I can do many things, And when I think I'm the same, I kind of implicitly am affirming I'm eternal. I'm permanent in a certain sense. This is because our way of thinking, to think of something, to grasp something, to say this is this, implicitly we are attributing to it existence.
Yes.
To think something is to attribute to that existence, and to think something exists is to imply that it is permanent, the same.
But I think also we relate the beginning of existence to our universe.
Right.
And if something was actually eternal,
Mm-hmm.
the universe was just a couple minutes ago, right?
Right. But then the question is,
What happened before that? I don't know. I'm not suggesting that's real, but we are kind of limiting our thought about this to what our perception of our universe is, as opposed to eternity.
Of course, but the notion of eternity is also our perception.
Right.
Right.
Of course.
So in any case, whatever perspective we are looking at it, it is always from our human perspective that we are looking at it.
Right.
So we are trying to look through our human perspective to understand within our human perspectives, which is the most reliable one, which will not mislead us. It is easy to, for our mind, to imagine all kinds of things and think that those things are real. Maybe there's other ways of imagining things or still imagining things. It's not actually, maybe we have a fundamental default in our way of knowing, through which no matter what we think we know, it's always erroneous. But maybe there is a way of knowing, although it may, from a certain perspective, be erroneous, it is nonetheless reliable. It will not mislead us. So, for example, from the Buddhist perspective, if you have the nihilistic view, so I think this is an important point to underline. If you have the nihilistic view, such as, for example, proposed by the Charvakas, that the nihilistic view is characterized by the fact of thinking, and it's very, I think, predominant in our modern times, is the idea that we think our thoughts and actions have no real consequences in our becoming. It's more specifically, I think, related to the physicalist view that our mind or consciousness is somehow just a byproduct of our body. That once we are dead, then there's nothing. Like you blow out the candle, if you blow out the flame, there's no more light. This body is dead, there's no more consciousness. That's the nihilistic or kind of physicalist view. If you have that view, then you might not have any issue in harming other beings, for example, or engaging into actions that are unrespectful of others, because you do not believe that, for example, your actions truly have a consequence on yourself. Because once you're dead, that's kind of there's no consequence to whatever good or bad you've done. So if you can get away with it, why not? And so I think this is kind of a predominant view. So that is the extreme from a Buddhist perspective, that although Buddhism is a non-theistic tradition, and speaks, for example, of the non-existence of the self, but the Buddhist teachings don't follow that route. It's not what is sometimes known today as the YOLO view. You only live once. It's not that at all. So from a Buddhist perspective, our mind is a continuum. It preceded this life and it continues after our life. And what we do today, how we think and behave, our actions that we do today, determine who we will become tomorrow, and how we will be reborn in our next life. Whether we, for example, our actions will necessarily have a consequence. Some people, even in life, you can see with little effort, they enjoy a lot of comfort and favorable conditions. Others, no matter how much effort they make, they always meet up with difficulties and problems in life. And that is due to their own psychophysical dispositions that they inherited by their previous behavior. And your behavior is determining what degree of pain or suffering or happiness that you'll be able to enjoy in your future. So therefore, from a Buddhist perspective, actually, if you were to choose between the eternalistic view, that is to think, for example, that on one hand, in a theistic tradition, there is a God that is watching over us, that will reward us and punish us. That is a better view than the nihilistic view. Or else, for example, to consider from a eternalistic view that there is a self that endures, is also that endures or is permanent, is also a better view than the nihilistic view. Although both views are not actually accurate about what reality is. And so here, when we are trying to cultivate wisdom, it is about trying to see reality as it is. So I'll go back to yes.
This question from the online community.
Yep.
On the same subject. If mind is unborn, or you could say eternal, what's the difference with theistic traditions? Because is mind eternal?
Is mind eternal? Mind. So here, this is an interesting view, an interesting point. When you say eternal, and you say something exists, it implies permanence. And permanence means something is the same thing. For example, if today you are healthy and tomorrow you're sick, your state is not permanent, it's impermanent. Okay? So you cannot say that is eternal. So something that today, no matter what happens, is healthy, no matter what happens tomorrow will also remain healthy, that would be permanent. So such kind of quality of unchangingness, of always remaining the same, identical to itself, is what is defined as, you could say, eternal. And such quality is not found in the mind as in that sense of that kind of substance that you can grasp and say, oh, this is the eternal entity of mind. That doesn't mean that the mind is not something that is perpetual. So there is a nuance between eternal and perpetual. Mind is an instance of kind of consciousness that enables the next instance of consciousness to arise. In this sense, is without beginning and without end. And this is perpetual, but shouldn't be confused with eternal. or it is not a static thing. If you look at mind, it can know, it can experience all kinds of things. If mind were to be something that is eternal, it would only ever experience one thing. It will never change from that. Whereas it is a dynamic process. So we saw here, to summarize a little bit, that Buddhism, the unique characteristics of Buddhism are not just the fact of the path of non-violence, nor how to say, the practice of meditation, nor the view on the non-self, nor the fact that it is non-theistic. We can add to this that another point that is important, also always in relation to the question whether is Buddhism a religion or not, you can put it in relation to that, is the fact that Buddhism is, you could say, soteriology, meaning that the practice of Buddhism aims to attain awakening. And you could think in this sense that maybe this is what defines Buddhism, that it aims to for liberation from conditioned existence. But is that what defines Buddhism principally or not? Well, this is something you find also in other traditions. The aim, and also this is another definition of religion. Religion is not just the fact of believing in God. There are religions and that don't believe in God, but that aim for a certain degree of liberation, to the attainment of a greater state of freedom. And so in this sense, you could say that Buddhism can be defined as a religion, for example, for Buddhism aims at attaining awakening, the state of Buddha. But that is not, of course, unique to Buddhism. You find that in many other traditions. Then there are other, of course, points, but maybe one last point that I can think of is we might think, oh, okay, to be a Buddhist is about taking refuge in the three jewels. We're defined as a Buddhist because we've taken refuge in the three jewels. And that somehow would exclude the Buddha from being a Buddhist. For Buddha, who's the object of refuge, he is already awakened. But that's somehow the ultimate refuge, actually. But there are also maybe other beings who are not necessarily Buddhist, but not, so to speak, opposed, who are not officially Buddhist, but maybe can be on the path towards awakening, or who are not opposed to that. So that alone is not what defines whether or not you're a Buddhist. So here, to somehow give more substance to what we saw, one can try to say, so what are the characteristics of the Buddhist path and that define someone as a Buddhist, which are unique to Buddhism and which would differentiate Buddhism from other traditions. Okay, so this is there are 4 points here. One is, you could say, in terms of someone who is in a reflection on or following a view, in terms of view, you could say, in terms of view, thinking about, what is reality, what is it that I can attain. So in terms of that, in terms of view, It is what is known as the four seals, whether or not you agree with the four seals or not. So these four seals are that all conditioned or compounded things are impermanent. This is one of the four seals. This is a very important teaching in Buddhism. For example, we might look at the notion of impermanence, and some of us might think that things are not impermanent by themselves, that they change due to outer circumstances. For example, we observe the house and we think, oh, it's run down because of lack of care or bad weather or whatever critters so off have damaged the house. Then we realize the impermanent nature of the house. But before that, we were thinking it's always the same thing. We were clinging on to the permanent nature, of supposed permanent nature of the house. What the Buddhist teachings explain to us is that if you think of a house, it is something that is dependent on many other elements. A house doesn't exist on its own. It just exists on the basis of the walls themselves, upon all the material elements that make up everything that makes up a house, and also on consciousness who is perceiving this house. So it's all a conditioned experience. It's something that depends on factors coming together. So anything, any phenomena, any reality that is in this way dependent, other phenomena, other factors that is in this way conditioned, is by its very nature impermanent. That means impermanence is not something that happens by accident. All conditioned phenomena are by their very nature impermanent, meaning that although you look at this wall, it doesn't seem to be changing right now, because of the fact that it is conditioned, it is actually changing. Although you are not aware, or you're not perceiving the change. This change is occurring not every day at midnight or every year on the 1st of January. It is happening each and every millisecond, or even faster than that. But it is not perceptible. And that is happening just by the fact of the nature of it being conditioned. So that's one important view. Another view that's quite important in Buddhist teachings is the view of that so this implies two somewhat complicated words that I have difficulties finding an exact equivalent in English for them. The idea here is that you could say everything that is dysfunctional is dissatisfying. Maybe it's a way to put it. The term here is everything that has leakage, or sometimes literally it means that, and it has been sometimes translated as what is one of the translations? Anyway, it'll come back to me later. Is dissatisfying, dukkha in Sanskrit. So this term dukkha is very important in the Buddhist teachings. It means that it's not just suffering in the sense of pain or not getting what you want, psychological dissatisfaction, in other words. It's much greater than that, in the sense that even what we would generally look at as happiness and well-being and pleasure, actually, if you look at it more carefully, it is a conditioned phenomena, you know, and therefore it is impermanent. And because it is impermanent, it is unreliable. And that's why it is also dissatisfying. It will always lead to dissatisfaction. So we'll talk more about this later tomorrow. But in other words, the main point here is that if all experience is based on our confused state of mind, the self-centered state of mind that expresses desire, hatred, jealousy, pride, and so forth, as long as that is present, there is always constant dissatisfaction. So whether you accept that view or not. So there's much to be said about this point of course. So the term sometimes sakpa has been translated contaminated. Now all things that are contaminated, you could say, by your confusion are characterized by dissatisfaction. So whether you accept that or not. And then the third point is that third seal, that all phenomena lack self. Meaning here that if you look within yourself, you have this idea of I, ego, of course. And actually, where is this I? Is it an independent phenomena? I mean, our way of looking, our general assumption, we all have this idea of I kind of spontaneously. We don't have to teach our children about it. They express it naturally. And when we talk about I, we kind of think of it as an independent entity that owns the mind and the body. And that is almost separate from the mind and the body. We say, my body, my mind, as if the I was something separate. So if it's something separate, where is it? If it is not separate, is it just the body? If it is the body, this idea of I that we have doesn't correspond to it. Yes?
So if the end concept is basically the notion of mind is dependent on many other factors, so it's not its own sort of static thing, does that then imply that every other factor is sort of this notion of a big mind?
A big mind?
Can you repeat the question?
Yeah.
Can you please maybe say it louder?
Oh, if you could say that louder, yeah,
Yeah.
that'd be great,
Sure.
please.
So if the notion of mind is that it's not a static thing and therefore is shaped by all other aspects to the mind or all other things that are shaping it, does that then imply that everything is this notion of a big mind, a sea of mind that this mind sprouted out of and looks static?
Okay. Well,
People online are still not going to be
okay. So the idea here, I believe the question is, if there's not one personal mind, is there one kind of universal mind, so to speak? Is that the question? I think the question of ego and mind is a little bit different. The idea of ego that I'm talking about here is the idea that we have of I am. I think I am this and this person. And I think this I is the same since I was born and since I die. And it will be the same once I die into another life, for example. And we can imagine that there's such an entity that is independent from my mind and my body, which is the I. and the I owns the mind and the body. So this is the notion I'm talking about. Now the question saying that there is no I does not imply that there is no mind. You see, so I think your question somehow comes from the idea you're thinking maybe that when I'm saying there is no I, I'm saying that there is no mind.
So does that imply that there is a static mind?
It doesn't mean that there is a static mind. Mind, if it is static, then you would not be able to think anything, right? Just that very fact that you are thinking, it shows that it's not static, it is dynamic. So mind is not never defined as static. So there can be a mind, but this mind cannot be the I because it is not static, it is dynamic. And this does not imply necessarily that you have to believe that there is kind of a universal mind as opposed to an individual mind. This mind stream can be, so to speak, individual. If the mind stream was, so to speak, universal, then if one being maybe attained awakening, all other beings would attain awakening also because it's all one same mind. You see, and maybe the bad actions you do, some other mind will get the results from it because it's all one universal mind. So there are many problematics with that. That is not the Buddhist view. There is individual mind streams that are distinct from one another. That means that if you attain awakening, it is something that you have managed to do, that mind stream has fulfilled, accomplished. And it will not imply that others will be liberated necessarily from that. Or that if you accomplish one negative action, another person will not have to endure the consequences of it. Only that or very mind stream that committed those actions at the beginning will endure the consequences of it. So there is an individual mind stream distinct from other mind streams, but that individual mind stream does not in its essence have irreducible permanent essence that can be grasped as an I, that corresponds to the idea of I that we have as always the same and one and permanent. Yes?
So a follow-up question regarding that. So if there is an individual mind stream, maybe I have a misunderstanding from what, so like in the Diamond Sutra, where the Buddha tells his student near the end, if you believe that I did something, you're thinking wrong. I didn't do anything in becoming a Buddha. How is that? What does he mean by that, I guess?
He means by that,
Sorry.
okay, the question is related to, in the Diamond Sutra, the Buddha says, if you think I did something, that means that you misunderstood because he didn't do anything. So I believe that this is actually saying, what the Buddha is saying here is that awakening is something not that you create. You can imagine that, for example, to become a Buddha, you have to take refuge first, then develop bodhicitta, then engage in, these are what are taught, practice of the 6 paramitas, during 3 limitless aeons, working for the benefit of sentient beings. And as a result of all of this practice, meditation, cultivation of wisdom, then you will gain the fruit of awakening. Actually, that fruit of awakening is not, if you really look into it carefully, it's not that awakening is something that you have produced to create it. It is simply, awakening is simply the true and ultimate nature of your mind. that you have actualized. Therefore, it is not something that you do or create. It is what you already are that you actualize. So it is that which is being implied here, not that there is a universal mind of some sort. Okay. Okay. Now then, where were we? That all phenomena lack inherent self. I was trying to explain that, but well, we talked about that, I think, sufficiently for now. And that's the third seal. The fourth seal is that nirvana is peace. So that means if you transcend all your confusion, your dualistic clinging, the afflictive states of mind, transcend the ego clinging, then and the consequences of the ego clinging, which are the afflictions and karma, then the mind in its true natural state is truly free, and that is true peace, you could say, to interpret a little bit or to give some commentary on that seal. So that's the first of the 4 points, and then a second point, we'll cover it very briefly, is related to meditation. So here, what is unique about Buddhist meditation? Of course, there are many methods that are taught. Sometimes we call them different forms of meditation. But essentially, all the different methods that we use can be combined together into 2 main types of meditation. One type of meditation is known as the shamatha meditation, or calm abiding. This is something that is not unique to Buddhism. You can find forms of calm abiding meditation in other traditions as well. And then another type of meditation that is done on the basis of calm abiding or together with it, and it is the greatest and more profound form of meditation, which is related to what is known as vipassana, which is discernment, which is establishing the mind in its true natural state, free from all confusion, which is related to realizing non-self, emptiness. And this meditation, which is cultivating actually what we know as wisdom, and this is what leads us to transcend conditioned existence. So, with this meditation, fundamentally, must lead to that. That is the ultimate kind of practice of meditation. And in this sense, with this meditation, you could say you are a Buddhist or not in terms of philosophy or terms of view, whether or not you accept the 4 seals. You can say, you can distinguish your meditative practice as Buddhist or not, whether or not you are effectively able to cultivate wisdom or not. That means practice a meditation that will transcend conditioned existence or not. You can say, oh, I'm practicing meditation, but if you're not actually transcending conditioned existence, then your meditation is not actually Buddhist. So here, I think it's important to look at the etymology of Buddhist. The term Buddha comes from the word to awake, to become awake. What do you try to awake from? You try to awake from confusion, from illusion and dissatisfaction. So if your meditation is not doing that, you're not actually doing a meditation that is awakening, and therefore it is not Buddhist, so to speak. I mean, etymologically speaking. And then in terms of ethical discipline, as I explained, the middle way uh, that avoids the two extremes of leading a life just for pleasure, or leading or doing practices that harm us. The path of simplicity that we spoke of. So this path of non-violence also is about not harming others, and on top of not harming, to try to be able to benefit others. So when we say not harming others, for example, it is to have this attitude. If someone, for example, slanders us, to not slander them in return. That means if somebody hits us, to not hit them in return. If somebody is angry at us, to not be angry at them in return. If somebody, insults us, to not insult them in return. So that's part of the ethics. This is the middle way, to not engage into any violent actions. So no matter what harm or negativity falls on us, to be able to accept that situation, work with that situation, and not make that situation worse by engaging into violence and negative actions. So that's a very important part of Buddhist ethics. So this is the basics. If you don't want to harm others, you have to be able, of course, there are things related, for example, to our desire or needs. So if we can have a more simple life, also think about our actions and what we consume, whether or not what we are consuming entails harming and hurting a lot of sentient beings or not, to reduce on all of that. But somehow there is, we can work on all of that. But somehow there's kind of a border of nonviolence. Somehow we can stay within that border of nonviolence until the moment when somebody insults us, until the moment when somebody hits us, until the moment when somebody harms us. So we have to be able to, extend our border, so to speak, to the sense that those are no longer the border where we will fall into violence. We have to be able, no matter what hardship we meet with, never fall into violence. So this is the important aspect of Buddhist ethical practice. And then finally, I think a very important point here is about the aim. We spoke about, Buddhism as being a soteriology, meaning aiming to attain awakening, transcend conditioned existence. So this, as we saw, is not unique to Buddhism. Many propose that, but if you look at what is taught often in many religions and spiritualities, is that there's some kind of ultimate state that is proposed, but is somehow a utopia. It's a paradise with honey, a river of honey, or it is kind of a bland place, neutral place, where everybody is serene, or there's all kinds of different views on what is it that where we want to be reborn, where we want to be. You often have in religions description of what it is, or union with God or something. There's some kind of goal that is described, and if you look at the goal, it often falls into what we could characterize as somewhat of a utopia. And furthermore, that goal is always only accessible once you're dead. And furthermore, somehow, you have to right now suffer to be able to go there. You're given a list of hardships you have to go through to be able to go to that utopia once you're dead. So that's how generally it is in most religions.
Yeah.
However, here in the Buddhist perspective, what I find that was very interesting, very unique, is that that ultimate goal, so to speak, is not about somewhere or becoming something different. It's just about actualizing the innate and true qualities of your mind. And it's just basically transcending your confusion, and this through this confusion we have put ourselves in a process of where we are determining ourselves. Our enemy, source of our suffering, is found nowhere else elsewhere than within ourselves. And also our true freedom is found within ourselves and in the innate and true qualities of our mind. So that is the uniqueness of Buddhism. It's not a teaching about some utopia. It's about some reality of our own mind. And we don't have to wait till we're dead to find out what is this true reality of our mind. We can find out about it right now, here. And also, another important point of Buddhist practice is not a practice where you have to suffer now to reap benefits in your future life or somewhere else. If you practice Buddhism properly, you'll reap the benefits immediately in this very lifetime. Yeah, immediately. So these are, if you follow Buddhist ethics, naturally this will improve your life, your condition. If you practice meditation, this has immediate benefits for you now and for your life in general. Wisdom, understanding the true nature of mind, something that you can access in this very lifetime. And awakening is something that you can actually actualize now. There are many teachers who have done that up until our present. So this is, I think, something very very unique about Buddhist teachings. Our time is kind of I've gone over time a little bit here, I realize. However, we will discuss more tomorrow and day after tomorrow on these topics. So here, just to conclude, what is very interesting about Buddhism is that it's a teaching that's very much based in reality. It's a very universal, accessible to all. It's not a teaching that is limited to one culture or to one language or to one way of leading your life. How you have, if you look at religions, mainly it's very cultural. You have to marry in a certain way. When you die, you have to do certain rituals and so on and so forth. It's very cultural oriented in general. Buddhist teachings are beyond that. If you have to summarize what is Buddha's heritage, it is a knowledge and its realization. If whether or not you get hold of that inheritance that Buddha left us depends on whether you study or not, and then whether you practice or not. If you study, you learn, you will understand what the Buddha taught. And if you cultivate these teachings, you will come to that realization and truly actualize those innate qualities of your mind and be able to actualize in your very lifetime awakening. It's something that is truly possible. Of course, when you describe awakening as something very great and grand and so forth, but it is to emphasize how important it is, but it's not to show that it's something very far and inaccessible. It is something that is accessible. So I'll conclude with those words, and if you have a few more questions, or those of you who are on the internet. Yeah.
You were talking about being nonviolent and the idea of not expressing anger.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious to learn more about if it's possible to speak to someone in a nonviolent way and still feel anger.
And still feel anger. Mm-hmm.
Repeat the question.
I didn't quite get the question.
Is it
How
possible to speak to somebody in a non-violent way
and still feel the
anger.
okay.
I just ask because I think anger is one of the core emotions.
Yes.
I'm confused as to why it's not okay to express anger.
Okay, why it's not okay to express anger.
Yes.
All right. It's a very, very, very good question because anger is very anchored in our life because sometimes we feel hurt, and anger is not something that we do somehow freely, deliberately. It is mostly in reaction to a situation where we feel that we have been hurt and harmed, and it is often our last resource and a way, kind of a mechanism for us to defend ourselves or to try to protect ourselves. And so, violence has been also in this way in society kind of institutionalized in the form of the army, in the form of justice, in the form of police, and what have you. Now, why is it negative why is anger negative? Okay. So the very first thing to understand about anger and its negativity is to just look at the experience itself. When you experience anger, you are definitely unwell. Nobody likes to be angry. It's something very uncomfortable, dissatisfying, it's painful, it's difficult. And each time you express it also, it's difficult for the person who is the recipient of your anger. Difficult for you, it's also difficult for the other person. The Buddha compared anger to the sting of a bee. The bee dies from it. He hurts the other and he dies from it. So it's painful for whoever experiences it. That's why it's negative. And if you look at the consequences of it, it never really solves the problem. It always makes the problems worse. And, when you get hurt, then you think you have to revenge, you hurt the other, then they retaliate. Then it's, you have lineages like that of families who have, blood feuds. Corsica is a place that is well known for that in Europe. And my great-great-great-grandfather was hurt by that family, we will have to never forgive them, and so on and so forth. So then, it is never-ending, so to speak, problem. So that's why it is negative. Now, if you think about absence of anger, it's serenity. If you look at that, it's happy. It's comfortable, comparatively. It's what we all want, actually. And here, working with anger, it's about actually, we somehow in life put our inner state of mind conditional to our expectations about how things should be, or how I should be treated, or how life should be. So if I imagine life should be in this way, or I have a certain standard that I'm expecting of also how people so far have been treating me. You know, for example, you can imagine imagine you are a teacher, okay, and you have been treated respectfully by people, and someday somebody treats you irrespectfully. So it's not up to what your standard has been, the cause of being upset, anger, for example, or I don't know. Many people have different types of standard according to where they are in their life or their situation. I think higher up you're in society, maybe your standards are much higher. You're more easily upset. More luxurious life you have, slightest little thing, it becomes uncomfortable. You know, if you're living a rugged life just in the nature, you don't have hot water, it's not a problem. You've had hot water every day, your life hot shower, and you don't have it anymore, you get really upset, for example. You know, this all depends also on what degree. So you can see here that the causes of being upset and angry are actually not that much dependent on external factors only. They are dependent also on our expectation. So here, working with overcoming anger is actually trying to make a commitment towards serenity. That means deciding that I will be serene and happy no matter what. That means here working with your expectations. So being able to accept situations that usually you wouldn't accept. It's just for the sake of serenity and for putting an end to violence and harm and negativity.
Anger almost by definition is illogical.
Also, yes, I mean, it is, anger can, it's counterproductive. Yes.
Is enlightenment permanent?
So the question is enlightenment permanent? Enlightenment is perpetual, in the sense that you could say yes, it's permanent. You could say it's permanent, but it's permanent in the sense that it is a realization. Once you have actualized it, you will not lose. But it is not kind of a static state in the sense that of permanence as we generally, or eternity as we generally understand it. But there is no, once you are completely and truly awakened, there's no losing that. Becoming confused again will not occur.
I've heard people say that Buddhists are selfish,
Mm-hmm.
and because you're only working on yourself, there's not really a community or a group thing about Buddhism.
So the question is, I've heard Buddhism is selfish because there's not really. There's other people say that about Buddhism, also because Buddhism is not very oriented towards building a community. Is that correct?
And also to look inward.
And because Buddhism is focused inwardly on yourself and working on yourself more than working on your community. Okay. I hope I rendered the question properly. It's a very interesting question, I think. And of course, when you talk about awakening the true nature of your mind and becoming a better person, it's very much focused on meditation and doing things yourself. And of course, I can understand how you can have that kind of view or image of Buddhism. However, I think you can turn around the question a little bit in the sense that actually, you know, how can you do things for others if you don't have any qualification? You know, for example, you could want to be a doctor. I mean, you could want to, cure other people's illness. But if you're not a properly qualified doctor, you will not never be able to do that. If you try, you could want to do that, try to do that, say you're curing people, but you could actually make their condition even worse. And so if you want to be able to really help them, cure them, you need to have the skills to do that. And that implies that you have to work on yourself to gain those skills, because you don't have them spontaneously. If you had them spontaneously, then everybody would be able to perfectly help everyone. And you can see a lot of times that in the name of helping others, actually sometimes we make situations worse for others. So just say, there's also a saying, I think in English, the path to hell is paved with good intentions. Yeah? Everybody wants to do good and thinks they're doing the best thing and engages in all types of action. Like, for example, even anger. Sometimes people think it's the right thing to do, the good thing to do. But through that, they mislead themselves, mislead others, harm others. So it's very important for us to have a certain degree of humility and to see where we are and look at our understanding of the world, of ourselves, and of what we can do and what is a source of true benefit or not. And helping others is also not necessarily doing things for them, but also being an example, a good example ourselves. You can't live another person's life for them. You can't do the things that they have to do on their own. For example, you could be a good teacher of grammar, know perfectly grammar, but you can't make another person know grammar if he doesn't want to learn it. So maybe you can make grammar interesting by speaking well and being a good example, and then it will rub onto them. And so a lot of things in life is you have to start by working on yourself, working on improving yourself, being a better human being, a kinder human being. And by doing that, you will have an impact on your immediate surrounding, on your family, on your friends, on your community, on the world. And so Buddhism is not at all actually saying, oh, you have to be selfish and just focus on yourself and let the world live in its problems. It's very much the contrary. Buddhism is teaching you have to work on, of course, yourself, so that you can have a true positive impact by being a good example, by being a kind human being. And actually, if you look at Buddhist teachings and kind of the structures the Buddha created, they're very much integrated with society. Like, for example, even if you look at the monastic institution, which is somehow individuals who have left the worldly life to focus on meditation and practice. They do that, but not kind of completely segregated from the rest of the world. They depend for their livelihood on other people who support them, who give them alms, food to survive. And in return of their alms, they show the example of the life of simplicity, of nonviolence, of kindness. They how to say, maintain the knowledge, the inheritance of the Buddha, and share that with others. And so there is kind of the Buddhist community of monks cannot live without the community of the lay people who are who are engaged in the world and engaged in business or commerce or whatever. So there is the idea that, you know, the Buddhist teachings and practice should be present in the world and present in and have an impact on its surroundings.
There's a question online. I think this may
Yeah.
be our last question too, because to make progress in Buddhism, does the practitioner need to meet a real life enlightened being? How would they know? Are there many of them in the world today, and where can you find them?
You know, I think one interesting thing is that what is said about the Buddha is that enlightened beings can appear in the world more often than we think so. But the appearance of the teachings are rarer even than the appearance of an enlightened being. So I think that you don't necessarily have to search and find that enlightened being. You have whatever an enlightened being can teach you accessible in the words of the Buddha that are present. It is the living presence of the Buddha or his words, his teachings. The Buddha said that once he entered into parinirvana, as he was entering into parinirvana, he said that his successor was his teachings. And they are present here and now. And there is, even if you meet an enlightened being, there is not more that he could say than what the Buddha has already taught. And so this is what is truly rare that one should cherish. You know, often Buddha can appear, but he can decide to not teach. That's what happens usually. It rarely does it happen that he teaches. And so we have that teaching. It has survived, come up to us. It is accessible for us. So that is something very precious and rare. And it is all we actually really need. So thank you for your attention, and looking forward to seeing you all again tomorrow. And if you have questions that have not been answered, you can ask them tomorrow. And I'd like to invite you all to reflect a little bit on these points, particularly think about, you know, what does it really mean to be a Buddhist? Personally, you know, how is it that personally you could, what does it mean for you personally to be a Buddhist in light of what we have said? And how can you take these teachings and see, you know, am I really a Buddhist or not? This is a good question. You know, we can call ourselves a Buddhist, but am I really a Buddhist or not? Depends on whether or not, you know, these different points are understood or not, or so whether philosophically or not we accept the Four Seals or not. Is our meditation really leading towards awakening or not? You see, in my ethical conduct, my discipline in my life, how I lead my life, is it really nonviolent or not? Is really what I am aiming a utopia, or really am I pursuing that reality of actualizing the true qualities of our mind or not? This is what I want you to homework, think about. Okay? And if, what can I do to really make progress on that also. Thank you. So we'll now conclude by a dedication of our studies to the welfare of all beings. Through this merit, may I attain true omniscience, then having overcome all harmful, destructive forces, may I liberate sentient beings from the ocean of existence and its turbulent waves of birth, old age, sickness, and death. May the most precious mind of awakening that has not yet dawned now arise. Once arisen, may it never decline, may it continue to increase evermore. May the most precious mind of awakening that has not yet dawned now arise. Once arisen, may it never decline, may it continue to increase evermore. May the most precious mind of awakening that has not yet dawned now arise. Once arisen, may it never decline, may it continue to increase evermore. Thank you.